Yeah.
Okay.
So welcome, Quanita Roberson in Ohio, in Cincinnati.
Yes.
And I'm Nilima Bhat in Mumbai, India on the 15th of August 2015. To Yogini hearts, to medicine woman hearts connecting across the ethers, across the oceans, opening up to see what is it that the Great Spirit and our higher selves wish to say through us today, to us, and to whoever now comes and hears and listens to what we are sharing here today.
Thank you.
So, Quanita, you are this medicine woman. You do ritual. You bring your truth in many beautiful ways from many different lineages and traditions. So, can you just briefly share what are you drawing from when you bring your work to the world? What is your background? Who are we honoring as we step into our work?
So I think that I have a lot of people standing behind me, I'll say, whether it's my ancestors who, were slaves and slave owners, whether it was, ancestry in terms of people who weren't necessarily blood relatives, but people who I've come in contact along the way, or people who just my spirit feels connected to, who I call on for help and support and guidance. My spirit guides, my animal totems, all of those, I feel like I have access to that step in and help when I'm in the middle of whatever it is I'm doing at the moment. I can call on them.
So, from what I know about you, Juanita, is that you talk about wanting to be a modern mystic, and you talk about a new archetype that's available to people today. You're very comfortable with all this language. So, can you share a little bit? I mean, what's so natural to you? But what is this language? What do you mean by, we are here to choose the archetype we want to be? What is archetype, and how can we be that? And what do you mean by modern mystic?
So first of all, I would say that I don't necessarily want to be a modern mystic. I think it's who I agreed to be this lifetime. And so there's struggle with that at times. The archetypes often, we have the agreements before we come here. Our personalities aren't a part of choosing that. And so there's been a lot of having to make peace with what my sacred contracts require of me and the people closest to me, mostly my children. The modern mystics as an archetype, I think is a fairly new archetype. Carolyn Mace talks about the modern mystic. Matter of fact, she has a wonderful CD titled The Modern Mystic, where she talks about how the archetype of the mystic is being transformed because we're growing and evolving as a people. And it's being transformed into a mystic that's required to be in the world. How do we be in this world and not of this world? Mystics in the past could be sequestered, they could be in convents, or they could be in stay at ashrams and just be there and do their work. We are asked to be in families and have spouses and children and work, and there's a requirement of the ego that's a little bit different, because you have to have a strong spiritual ego if you're out in the world. You have to be able to know when to say no and when to say yes, and again, to be in it but not of it. There was a journeying that I did with a group of women, and I remember going into the journey, I was really sad. I was just grieving that day because I was sitting with this thought, and I shared with them that It feels like the deeper you go, the lonelier it feels.
Mm.
And when I went into the journey, the ancestors showed up in my journey, and what they said to me is, "It's not true. You made it up." They said it's not true because you're not alone because we're here. And they
Right.
said what needs to happen for you is that the spirit world needs to become more real to you than this one.
Mm.
And you know, I that's a hard one because we have to surrender our own will. We have to surrender our will to what we think we want to what we're really here to do.
Yeah. So, I'm just trying to relate this back to the journey, the heroic journey, the hero's journey, the heroine's journey. And my work is trying to connect that with the idea of Shakti, which is the power, cosmic power outside and within us. And that if we have to go from being the ordinary egoic self to becoming the divine self, the true self that we are, we're going to have to make that journey. And it's going to have its challengers and allies, and we're going to have to die in some way in order to be resurrected and reborn in the truth of who we are. And even while everything is the context of that journey, so the modern mystic lives, and the people around her, spouse and children, everyone is playing those roles, right, of being the mentor or the challenger or the shadow, or it's all of them are simply playing those archetypes for you as you do the journey. So when I look at you, I see you doing the journey on many levels. One is the journey of a woman in these times. The other is also the journey of a black woman in America in these times. So there is a cultural journey you are doing, and you are doing the journey to heal that story actually. So can you talk a little bit about how are you making the journey in the most conscious way possible, uh, as you work with whatever is the narrative in your context? It's hard, it's difficult, there's a lot of pain there. And to what extent do you honor that pain, and when do you create a new story instead of trying to keep that one going?
I think part of the way that I honor it, on just a very practical side, is that I have two children. I have a 13-year-old son, a 13-year-old biracial son, and an 11-year-old biracial daughter.
You had married, you're single, and you had married a white man?
Yes, yes.
Okay.
And so I'm divorced now, and part of my job in being mother to these two children are these two children are the descendants of slaves, and the descendants of the sons and daughters of the American Revolution.
Mm.
So how do I mother all of who they are?
Yes. Wow.
What does it mean to be their mother and let them know how important and valuable they are in this world, and not because of a part of themselves, but because of all of themselves? One of the things I told my daughter one day, I'm writing a book called African American Spirit Healing, and I was talking about a piece of the story and about how they have both of these parts in them, and she said that she kind of felt sad because she heard me talking about being, doing this book and them having both these parts, the slaves and the slave owners in them. And what I told her is, oh no, that's not a sad thing. I said, matter of fact, you're the physical manifestation of hope, all wrapped up in you. And how amazing is that? that your very being teaches us how to live it. And so I learned so much just from mothering them, just from feeling our way through, okay, who are they today? What do they need today from me? That honors all of who they are.
Wow. You, in previous conversations, we've talked about this, but I'd like you to share more. Uh, we live in relationship. We don't live alone. There's always someone else or more around us. And I've seen you really honor relationship in a very unique way. So, you gave us a quote the other day, and you said you got it from your own teacher that, well, relationships are to be made conscious. You've got to ask, who am I and who are we in this relationship? And speak a little bit about that. What is the purpose of relationship? What is the gift relationship can bring us? And how can we make the best of any relationship when you encounter another being? What is the best way to enter into that space?
I think the best way is to know that when they show up, they're God speaking. And so if we really get that, if we get that we're co-creators for everything that shows up for us, then when someone shows up and I'm in relationship with them, then I know there's something there for me. And so I ask different questions. If I'm not conscious that we're bringing experiences to each other, then when I come in relationship with you and say you piss me off or I get really upset with you, then it's so easy to think it's all about you. Well, she needs to get her act together. I don't know why she's doing this. I could go on and on. But when I really get that I'm a co-creator with spirit for everything that shows up for me, when you piss me off, then the question I'm going to ask is, what is this about for me? Which those are two very different things. So we get very different answers. When I ask, what is this about for me? Why did I call up this experience? What was it trying to get me to learn? That's what relationships are about. They're about helping us to get closer and closer to the divine. As a matter of fact, what's happened to us so much as we've evolved is we're more and more afraid of meeting the divine head on. So we have to do it through people. We've chosen then to do it through our relationships with people. And so we get to experience kind of smaller doses of the divine that helps us to get closer and closer through that way.
And then you also say that when two people come together, the responsibility lies with the one most healed in terms of how are they going to engage. What is the most how do you exchange the power of that with integrity? And you were speaking earlier to me about, it's not always friendship. And it's for you to gauge that. The one most healed has to gauge what is the real relationship here and how can I align with that rather than just blindly go into it and be surprised when it's not friendship, for example.
I think we're so taught that we get to choose who people are to us instead of that we're supposed to discover who people are to us. And when we think we get to choose, we meet somebody, and I meet a lot of people that I really like and I think are cool and I want to be friends with. And it becomes really clear at times that that's not who we're supposed to be to each other. That's not who we promised to be to each other this lifetime. And so our real job is to discover who we're supposed to be together. Because until we let go of who we think we are or who we want to be, we can't open to learning who we are. So one of those biggest lessons for me has come from my father. I have this idea of what a father's supposed to be and what they're supposed to do and, who he's supposed to be for me. But until I let go of what I thought he was supposed to do and be, I couldn't open to learning who he really is to me. What gifts did he bring to me this lifetime? Why did I co-create him as my father this lifetime? What's the medicine in that? The responsibility on the one most healed. Because I have done a lot of work, it's so easy for me. I won't say that. I'll say that oftentimes when we're in conflict with someone else, we want them to change or shift or do or whatever. Even though, because we can see, oh, they've screwed up, or we think we can see that they screwed up. We can see that a little bit more of the picture sometimes. But we're waiting on them to move. So why would we wait on them to do something when we can see it? One of the gifts is in just that we can. That if I can extend a forgiveness or some insight, why wouldn't I? People do that for us all the time. There are tons of people who are more healed than us who come in relationship with us and they can see things that we're doing because they have a different level of consciousness. And it doesn't mean that it's better or worse. When you think of children, I use this example often. My daughter's 11 and my son's 13. There's access that my 13-year-old has available to him just because of his age that my 11-year-old daughter doesn't. But that doesn't mean that 13 is better than 11. It just means that they see different things. And so how can we honor both? How can we honor what it is we do have access to and what we can do and do that?
There's so much to learn from you. And we were talking earlier about how relationships evolve. And a time comes when we have to move on, even from our teachers. And how can we do that, even though it may break our hearts? Someone is in a teacher-student relationship. Where we're learning and they are our teachers, and then a time comes when, as you said, we have to outgrow our teacher. And can you talk a little bit about what that feels like? Because it really feels like heartbreak to me. So what is the best way to experience that and go through that experience? Because it seems to me a necessary experience on the road to our individuation.
I think one of the biggest lies we have is that we all grieve differently. To me, that's not true. We all avoid grief differently, but the grieving itself is just the heartbreak. It's just sitting in that. And it is hard. And nobody wants to do it. It's not fun. And it's the only way to do it. And, there's a book called The Diamond in Your Pocket written by Ganji, I think it is. And one of the things she says is that we have to be willing to have our hearts broken time and time again. And we think about that, that breaking open time and time again, put yourself out there each time. And I think part of it is to know that the heartbreaking doesn't come by itself. That on the other side of that, there's two sides to every coin, and on the other side, there's this beautiful gift that we have access to if we're willing to sit in it. That doesn't make it not hurt, but it does make it easier, I think, to surrender to when you know that it's purposeful and that it's bringing something to you. It's bringing a gift to you. It makes it a little easier to just sit in the grief and move through it. I think so often we get stuck where we sit in the grief and we wallow in it instead of moving through it. And those are two very different things.
So say more about that.
So wallowing in the grief, where we just sit and turn things over and over and over again, but we're really not letting go of it. I think the wallowing happens because there's a resistance. We don't want to grieve, so we're trying not to grieve fully and we're holding back. And so there's this wallowing that we sit in it. But when we just really surrender to it, and we just let ourselves go into the grief and have people around that we know we can love and trust, who can hold that space for us, then we can feel freer to go into the depths of the grief and then go through it to come out the other side to get access to the gift.
So when you have grieved, and I know you grieve with many other women, you hold space for them, what has the gift your grieving has brought you?
My first reaction is everything. Is that sitting with women. I was with a woman last week. This woman is in a transition home. It's like a homeless shelter. It's a house, though, for women and children. And I was coaching her. And one of the things that happened in that space, in that coaching space with her, is that she ended up in tears and I ended up in tears. Because she said to me at one point, "How did you know me?" This was our first coaching session together. And my response to her was, "I am you." And the details are all different, of course, but I am you. And it's being willing to do my own grief work has added depth to my compassion, which allows me into spaces that I never would be invited into, that are so deep and sweet and beautiful. So much the opportunity to swim in the human experience.
So today being India's Independence Day, the theme of freedom. And what does it really mean to be free? Not just politically, but internally. Campbell talks about the freedom to live comes when the hero becomes the master of two worlds, the outer world and the inner world. Only then do you get the freedom to truly live, because if not, you are still in prison in some form or shape. Talk a little bit about forgiveness as a path to freedom.
So forgiveness.
And in your narrative, in your story, in your cultural story, the history of who you are today.
Forgiveness, we so think, is about the other person, about forgiving someone or something that's been done. And what I've come to learn is it's so much about forgiving self. It's always connected to us. It's like we think it's about the other person. So part of my journey, too, is that I am an incest survivor. And recently I had this memory, and it was this memory of talking with my stepfather, who was my perpetrator, about how he could abuse me. And what he said to me was, there was this growing of me that he had to do. So he had to make us equal. So it wasn't like an authority figure and a younger. It's like in his mind that we were these equal kind of people. And what came to me in that thought of that memory of that conversation was how I have called these men in my life who aren't fully grown yet who on the outside look grown because they're in their 50s or whatever, but internal, they haven't done their initiation. And what is that about for me? That I'm trying to grow these men just like my stepfather tried to grow me. And so the forgiveness piece wasn't just about him. It was about that piece in me as well. That I had, that it always looks like it's external. And what I've come to find is, I had my sacred contract with him too, my stepfather, and what it was that I needed to experience for what it is that I've promised to do this lifetime. And someone once said, I heard a definition of forgiveness as no longer wishing that what had happened was different. That we make peace with it. We no longer wish that there had been that something else had happened. And I don't know if we really know how to forgive. There's all these steps about forgiving and stuff, and I think maybe at a surface level, but what I've found is it's like an onion. There's always deeper and deeper and deeper and deeper you can go into the forgiveness. And every time I have gotten to a place where I really have felt this wave of forgiveness come over me, it's because I've prayed. Help me forgive, or even at times help me want to forgive, because there's been times that I didn't even want to forgive somebody. I've been so pissed at them, right? But help me forgive. And then what usually happens for me is I usually wake up about 3 o'clock in the morning sobbing. It usually falls into me around that time. And I know I've let it go. But it's something that...
The crying.
Yes.
The sobbing is like the breaking of the dam.
Yes, it's the water. It's the cleansing it out, because forgiveness, I see forgiveness as being connected to anger. And underneath anger is always just deep sadness and grief. And so how do we get to the deep sadness and grief so we can release it and get to the other side?
On a lighter note, this movie Inside Out, I'm just so delighted that mainstream filmmakers, like Disney, Pixar, are making films like this that children get to watch, because even though humanity has been around on the planet for so long, psychologically, we are really wanting to remain in the infant or adolescent stage, and we don't want to grow up, and yet it's all these emotions that are ruling us, and the pain that we go through life is because we do not know how to feel our feelings, how to live with them, how to manage them, how to get the gifts that they can bring for us. We simply do not know what is this stuff that swirls around in our everyday lived experience inside us. Emotions bubble up, come and go, and we have no idea. We're not given any training. We go to school and we learn physics, chemistry, biology. No one takes us through. We study the human body, but we are not really being given any kind of training or education in what is human psychology or emotion, and why does it come as an afterthought much later, only as a choice? If you want to choose to study psychology, then it's something you study about out there, about people who are mentally really on the disease spectrum. It seems to me that our coming of age is reflected in this film. That it can be a mainstream film, and a child is the protagonist of this film, and the feelings she starts experiencing, and what is the purpose of those feelings and emotions in the human experience. you
Mm-hmm.
know. So I think your work and the idea of Shakti being energy and all energy, including emotional energy, and how does one achieve mastery uh, or some level of competence over the stuff that moves us inside, from inside, you know. So what kind of work do you do, and do you do you feel children can do to not have to learn all these things the hard way?
Hmm. So children know it. We actually train our kids out of it. You know, I mean, children feel what they feel. I mean, they're very present. And they, you know, they'll be angry one minute and then it's gone because they've been angry and it's come through them, and then they're in the next moment. We teach them out of it. We're the
So
ones that's
I've got to share. So I'm sorry to
that's
stop you
okay.
there, but one of my clients shared a very interesting story with me just a day ago, and I realized on one hand we always look at children and childhood as the age of innocence and how they're so perfect, but some of the cruelest things that happen by children to children in you know, on the school bus and in the playground. And so that's the other reality, the shadow side of the child archetype, right? That in the need to individuate, the child self wants to be more than someone else and put someone else down. And the children can be extremely cruel to each other. So he was sharing with me how he was taking his kid who is in the second grade to the school, to the bus stop where the school bus has to come and pick them up. And normally this kid arrives before or after these other two are already waiting. So when this kid reaches, the other two, brother and you know, two set of brothers, one slightly older and one slightly younger than this kid in second grade, they say to him, "We're first, you're second," right? So a day came when this child reached earlier and these two came later. So this child turned around and very innocently said, "Oh, I'm first, you're second." And immediately those two children retorted back saying, "Oh, uh, first is worst, second is best." And right there, they kind of did one little power play. And then when the bus came, uh, when they had to board the bus, this second grade kid started staying back because he didn't want to be first getting on the bus, because he had internalized that thought that second is best.
Mm-hmm.
So he was now trying to get onto the bus later, rather, and in a way giving his power away yet again for these other two kids to get on the bus before him. And so this client of mine, the father was asking me that it, you know, it's so interesting that these children have to go out into the world and we're not always there to help them make sense of their daily experiences. So they make sense in their own way. And who knows how they make sense of it. And parenting is such a fine line to walk, and we'll never know if we get it right. And the truth is, we'll never be there all the time and protect our children. So, yeah, I just thought I should share this other side as well, that children are children also in today's context among adults, and they have learned a whole bunch of things
Mm-hmm.
very quickly from you know, people around them. So they don't necessarily come from innocence.
Well, I I would disagree a little bit. I think that they part of what makes them so susceptible to those lessons is that they come from innocence, but it's a naive innocence, and so they take what's said as true. You know, there's an indigenous belief that kids before the age of 7 aren't rooted here, so they don't have their own stuff. So all that they act out is our energy. They're like sponges. They just soak up all our energy. And I could tell, like, when my I call her my husband's mom died. My son, the weeks that Steve was having that were really hard and dealing with his mother being gone, are the weeks that my son would get really clingy to me. Or When I wasn't expressing the anger that I was feeling, my daughter would act it out. But because as parents we're not taught to pay attention to those things, that the kids don't have their own stuff yet, it's all ours. We think it's them. And so we treat them like, oh, these kids are bad kids, they're doing all this stuff, but they're just absorbing all our energy. They don't have their own stuff yet.
Sure.
And
Sure.
and so
Yeah,
so what happens is, just like kids can be cruel if that's what they live with,
yes.
kids also can be so loving and kind if that's what they live with. You know, my daughter came home one day from school and she was so upset. She goes in her room and she slams the door. She's 7 years old. And my first thought is, we don't slam doors in this house. What is, And so I go to her room and there's a sign on her door that says, I want to be left alone. And if you want to know why, knock. So I thought, okay, I'm game. So I knocked on the door and I go in, and come to find out, this little boy on the bus, she says, told her business to all the other kids. She said it was true, but he didn't have to tell everybody. And what I said to her was, I heard from a friend of mine once that we get it backwards. We think that men carry the power and women carry the love, but when we're at our best, it's just the opposite. When we're at our best, the men show up from pure place of love and the women show up from a pure place of power. And I said, and what happened was you forgot today to carry your power, and he forgot to carry his love. But your theme at your school is spreading peace. And so what needs to happen is, when you go back to school tomorrow, you need to tell him that hurts your feelings and that you don't want him to do that anymore. And she said, okay. And so the next morning I remind her, remember, you're going to talk to your friend. And she said she would. And she went to school. And she comes back home and I said, Michaela, did you talk to him? And she said, I have something to show you. And she brings me this card. And it was a card signed by her friend Charlie. And it said, I'm sorry I told your business to the bus. I was upset, but that was no excuse. And I hope that you can please forgive me and trust me with your secrets again. A 7-year-old. And so I told her, I said, I love that, because what community is supposed to do is community is supposed to remind you of the truth of who you are. And what happened was, Charlie went home and his mom reminded him of the truth of who he was. And Michaela came home and her family reminded her of the truth of who she was. And these two 7-year-olds figured it out. The mom I talked to later, because she didn't know the other side of the story. And she said to me, it was months later that I ran into her and I told her, and she says, Charlie came home and he was so upset because he knew Michaela was upset. And she says, I think she has 4 boys. She's like, I can't do everything, but I can teach them to say I'm sorry. She said. And so, I wonder how much of this story of kids are cruel are because they're just doing what they see. They're just showing us, through their eyes, like you said, how they make sense of what we do to each other every day.
Yeah, we come right back to that heart broken open feeling.
Yes. Yeah. And I often tell my daughter, because she's very emotional, she feels things so deeply, whether it's excitement and joy or sadness and grief, it doesn't matter. And I told her, I said, you're a powerful little girl. And it's wonderful because the world needs you and your emotions. And it's really hard to manage when you're young, because you don't have the life experience to really know all the ramifications. And so, but you can give yourself space to feel, and that's okay. It's a good thing.
So I think that kind of brings me to the closing thought on this. What's coming to me is the whole heroic journey that each of us is called to make to our initiation and beyond. The courage to feel. Why is it called heroic or hero's journey? It's because it takes courage to enter into the messiness of the human field of feelings, and to feel our feelings, and to sit in that heart until it's broken open. It's so much easier not to feel feelings. So it's so much easier perhaps to even act out the anger, because then it stops you from having to get to the depth of the grief.
I think that's the story. I think that's the illusion. I think it's easier up front. I don't think in the long run it is, though. I think we've been fooled. I think that, and this would, my closing thought would be that it's about, where do you want the struggle? Do you want the struggle up front where you're sitting and feeling it? Or do you want it later when your relationships are a hot mess because you haven't dealt with your own stuff? But we're gonna have to deal with it one way or the other. It's just a choice of which one do we choose. I tend to think that it's easier in sitting in it and doing the grief work there than having to deal with it in conflicts with other people, or having to deal with it in disease because it shows up in our body, or having to deal with it in other ways. We can't outrun it. It just shows up in another form.
So if I were to close with the question to Quanita, who is Quanita after she has journeyed, after she has gone through her initiation? And what is the gift she has brought back?
So for this one, I guess, because it's never an ending process. I'm still journeying, and I'll have another initiation, I'm sure. But right here, right now, a piece of who I am is that I'm really learning to just trust that life has a life of its own, and that I just need to get out of the way. That so much of my struggles and my pain are caused by me, and my control drama, and me trying to think that I know what things are supposed to look like. What I have to offer is, I know what community is. I know how to create space for community. Therefore, I know how to create space for grief. I know the feminine, and am learning a lot recently around this dance between the masculine and the feminine, and what gifts we have for each other. Not trying to be, and I said each other, but we have those parts in us too. But I mean also with the men and women, how to do that dance together, and what gifts we bring to each other. Because I think it is designed to be an interdependent relationship, the masculine and the feminine, and the different ways that it shows up in our lives. And I think one of my biggest gifts is my curiosity. Is that I take on my learning, and I take on that with this curiosity, in a way that not many people I know do. And so I ask a lot of questions. And when you ask questions of the universe, they start to send you the answers. They start to show up in strange places. And so that's what I think I bring.
Wow. So these series of interviews that I do, as Inspired When Inspired, are really about how Shakti speaks, the great feminine force that animates this whole creation and is living us through us, living herself through us, how she speaks through us. And every journey is another journey Shakti has made, the Great Spirit has made into manifestation. And the sense that every journey matters. And here is one such spark of the divine that has journeyed and lived to tell and share. And yet another way to give thanks for the beauty of the journey and the gift of life. So I thank you, Quanita, for embodying spirit, and for journeying so well on behalf of all of us. It's been a real gift just listening to your wisdom over the last few conversations. And I feel very hopeful when I talk to women like you. When I see people who have come from where you have come from, and to have come out of it and to stand there and to be even more free and even more whole than most other people who so-called have it good or easy, it gives me great hope that it's possible for each one of us. You model what's possible, and I thank you for that. I honor you for that.
Thank you. First of all, thank you for the invitation. How wonderful! I'm so grateful you reaching out. I've so enjoyed our conversations and what I get to learn through you. And this day of independence. How wonderful that I get to be a part of the conversation with you today, of all days. What a gift.
Yeah. So maybe we close with just saying thanks for freedom that's always ours to claim.
Yes. Ashe.